Last Sunday, my son called me at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning, the way he had every Sunday for 18 months. He asked if I'd taken my pill. He asked how I'd slept. And then he asked the question he always asked third. Is anyone there with you? For the first time in a year and a half, I lied to him. I said no. And that lie is the only reason I'm alive to tell you this. I'm 63, 28 years with the Oregon Department of Transportation, retired now, living alone in the same two-bedroom ranch in Medford, where my wife Carol and I raised our son. She passed 4 years ago, a stroke. I keep her hydrangeas alive along the front walk because it feels like the right thing to do. I take my blood pressure medication every morning with a glass of orange juice. That's the routine. That's been the routine. My son is 37. He lives 40 minutes south, in Ashland. He used to work for a logistics software company. Good job, own apartment, a life moving in the right direction. After his mother died, we grew closer than we'd ever been. He started calling more. And about a year and a half ago, those calls settled into a ritual I found touching. Every Sunday, 7 a.m. sharp, his name on my screen. Medication, sleep, company, heat. Then 15 minutes of football and garden talk, then I love you, and we'd hang up. I bragged about those calls. My neighbor Patrice, whose 3 grown kids never phone at all, said she envied me. My old highway crew buddy Frank said I'd raised my son right. I believed that grief had made him attentive. I had no reason to think otherwise. Until Frank finally made the drive up from Grants Pass, first trip since his knee surgery. We sat on the back porch till midnight catching up. Sunday morning, I was up early, coffee made, quietly hoping Frank would still be asleep when the call came, because I didn't like missing it. He was asleep. The house was quiet. And when the phone rang at 7 o'clock and I saw my son's name, something made me hesitate before I answered. Not suspicion exactly, just a flicker I didn't have a name for. He asked the usual questions. Medication, yes. Sleep, fine. Then, is anyone there with you? And I don't fully understand why, even now, but I said no. Just me. Quiet morning. There was a pause. 2 seconds maybe. Then he said, good. Okay, good. Not like an acknowledgement. Like relief. We finished the call normally. He said he loved me. I said it back. I meant it. I stood in the kitchen afterward with a feeling I couldn't name. Not guilt, just the strange awareness that the lie had come out of me so easily, and that he'd sounded relieved to hear it. Frank came down for breakfast around 8. We were 40 minutes into eggs and coffee when he set his fork down. The look he always got when something on a job site didn't add up. I noticed something last night, he said. That pill organizer on your bathroom counter. Yesterday was Saturday. That slot should have been empty. It should have been. I take my pill first thing every morning. But it wasn't. And Frank, 28 years of working beside me, said it wasn't even my pill. Mine's a white oval. This one was round, a different size. I went and looked. He was right. I stood there holding a pill that didn't belong to me, in an organizer that never left my bathroom, in a house nobody entered except me. And my son, on his visits every 2 or 3 weeks, when he'd use the bathroom, get water from the kitchen, check my thermostat because he said I kept it too low. I'd always found that endearing. He was looking after me. I called my pharmacist that afternoon. Her colleague listened to my description, white, round, scored line down the middle, and came back after 2 minutes on hold to tell me it sounded like a diuretic. Taken alongside my blood pressure medication without supervision, it could cause dizziness, confusion, drops in pressure severe enough to trigger falls. In an older man, he said carefully, it could look like the early signs of decline. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Frank found me there and asked, quietly, what I wanted to do. What I wanted was an explanation that wasn't the one forming in my head, but I kept circling back to the calls. The third question, always the third question, the same order every week. The pause, the word good said like satisfaction, not warmth. Every Sunday I'd answered honestly. Every Sunday I told him I was alone, that no one had been by. Every Sunday he'd known exactly what he was working with. This Sunday I hadn't been alone. I'd lied. And nothing had happened. I sat up that night going backward through 18 months of calls, trying to find where something in him had changed. I found it, or thought I did. About a year and a half ago, right when the ritual started, he'd lost his job. He never told me outright. I pieced it together from something he let slip about working from home. He said he had savings, said he was fine. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Carol and I had drawn up our wills 15 years back, after her hypertension diagnosis. Mine hadn't been touched since she died. The house had more than doubled in value since we bought it in 2001. Between the property, my pension, and what we'd saved over a working life, there was more there than I'd ever bothered to add up. I'd never thought of it as something anyone would want to hurt me for. Sitting in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, it felt different. It felt like something someone might look at from the outside and see as a way out. Monday, I called my doctor. She had me come in that afternoon with every medication I owned, including the pill from the organizer. Thorough, direct, unruffled. She sent the pill to a lab and ran my blood work, which she said I should have been getting done anyway. My potassium was low. Not dangerously, but consistently. Low enough, she said, to explain the fatigue I'd mentioned back in October, the heaviness in the mornings, the dizziness I'd shrugged off as getting older. We'd agreed to just monitor it back then. Now she asked, carefully, the way doctors ask something significant, has anyone else been managing your medications or had access to them? I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. My son called Tuesday, not the Sunday call, just a midweek check-in. He sounded normal, asked how I felt. I said fine. He said he might drive up Saturday. I said sure, come for lunch. I told Frank I'd thought about calling the police. I told him I'd thought about almost nothing else for 3 days. And I told him this was my son, the boy who cried harder than either of us at the vet's office when we put our dog down, who stood at his mother's grave and held my hand because there was nothing left to say. Frank said, I know, but that doesn't change what's in your bathroom. He was right, but I needed to understand more before I did anything. Saturday, my son came through the door at 11:45, jacket half unzipped, same rushed look he'd had since he was a teenager. He hugged me, asked how I was feeling. Good, I said. Really good, actually. I'd prepared. I'd swapped the organizer for an identical one, stocked with nothing but my correct, pharmacy-verified medication, and on Frank's suggestion, Frank had driven back up Thursday just to help me do it right. I'd placed a small pet camera inside my bedroom closet, angled through the partly open door toward the hallway. Setting up a camera in my own house made me sick to my stomach. I did it anyway. We had lunch, sandwiches, coffee, football on in the background. He talked about the drive, the weather, a podcast. He looked tired. He'd looked tired for a year and a half, tight around the eyes, the strain of a man trying to hold things together. Nothing in his face told me I was wrong. Nothing told me I was right either. After lunch, he asked to use the bathroom. Of course, I said. He was in there 9 minutes. I sat at the table counting every one of them and hating it. When he came out, something in him had loosened, the way a person looks after finishing something they'd been carrying. We watched part of the game. Around 3, he said he should head back before dark. He hugged me at the door, said he loved me. I said it back. I meant it completely. That was the hardest part. I meant it completely. I watched his car disappear down the street, went inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch without moving for a long time. Frank stayed on the phone with me that night while I watched the footage. My son closes the bathroom door. About a minute in, the angle catches him cracking it open to listen. It closes again. He doesn't come out for another 5 minutes. Nearly all 9 spent behind that door. Not on the toilet, not at the sink. I drove to the police station the next morning. There's no clean way to describe telling a stranger that you believe your own son has been substituting your medication. You hear the words out loud for the first time, and you listen to how they sound. And some part of you is still praying the detective will find the angle that makes it all a misunderstanding. The detective, quiet, about 50, neither aggressive nor dismissive, took the footage, the photos of the pills, said the lab result was still pending, asked whether my son and I had ever discussed the will, the house, the inheritance. We had. A few times, after Carol died. He knew what the house was worth. He knew about the pension, the savings. He knew he was the primary beneficiary. I'd told him myself, years ago. The detective asked when he'd lost his job. 18 months ago, I said. He wrote it down. Then came 10 days of waiting unlike anything I'd known, and I've waited through surgery, through weather, through the slow end of Carol's last weeks. I still made coffee, still deadheaded the hydrangeas, still answered the phone Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, still told him no, just me, quiet morning, still felt him say good, and sat with that word like a stone in my chest. The detective called on a Thursday. The lab confirmed it, a diuretic, not prescribed to me, dangerous alongside my blood pressure medication. His department had started looking into my son's finances. His savings were nearly gone. He owed back rent. He'd taken out a personal loan 8 months earlier. Credit card debt climbing since the layoff. And 3 months ago, the detective said, pausing the way people pause before the thing that changes everything, my son had inquired with an insurance agency about adding a life insurance policy on a parent. Never completed it. But the inquiry was documented. I set the phone down on the counter and looked out at the hydrangeas and thought about Carol, about how she used to say our son carried things he didn't need to carry, that she could see it in him even as a boy, this need to control every outcome before it could surprise him. She said it with love. I wondered if some part of her would have seen this coming. I think, probably, yes. He was brought in for questioning 2 days later. I wasn't there. The detective told me to stay home, and I did. What I learned afterward came in pieces, from the detective, from his attorney, eventually from my son himself, in conversations I'm still not sure I was ready for. Over roughly 14 months, he'd been substituting my blood pressure medication with a diuretic bought without a prescription through an online contact, irregularly, unpredictably, in a pattern designed to be hard to catch. He wasn't trying to kill me quickly. He was trying to make me look like I was declining. Forgetfulness, fatigue, dizziness, the kind of slow erosion that might eventually convince someone, his father maybe, that he needed to step in and take over the house, the accounts, the finances. When I first heard it laid out plainly, I couldn't connect it to the boy I'd raised. But it had happened. It hadn't broken down under scrutiny. It was real. Then came the part that reshaped everything. At his attorney's recommendation, with the court's agreement, my son underwent a full psychiatric evaluation. The report described something I hadn't known was there, a paranoid anxiety disorder, with obsessive features that had worsened sharply after he lost his job. Over roughly 2 years, he'd built an elaborate, fixed belief that I was being manipulated by the people around me, that I was in danger of losing everything, that some invented threat, a neighbor, a woman he believed I was seeing, though I wasn't, was coming to take what was ours. The Sunday calls had started as real concern and quietly become a surveillance system, checking each week whether the threat he'd imagined had advanced. He genuinely did not believe he was hurting me. In his mind, he was protecting me, ensuring I'd be cared for, under his oversight, the way he'd decided was correct. That the method itself was poisoning me never registered inside that logic. The fear had grown large enough to reorganize everything else around it. I read that report 3 times. The first 2, I was hoping the words would rearrange into something else. The third time, I read it as true. My son was sick. He'd been sick longer than either of us knew, growing in the space between Sunday phone calls, in the gap between what he felt and what he could say out loud. I won't walk through the legal process in detail. Some of it is still ongoing, and it isn't the heart of this. What matters is that the diagnosis changed the outcome. He wasn't sent to prison. He was placed in a treatment program, medication, weekly therapy, months of it now. We speak occasionally, short and careful calls, nothing like the easy ones we used to have. There's damage between us I don't know how to calculate yet, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I also know this. When he asked every Sunday how I'd slept, part of that was real. When he held my hand at his mother's grave, that was entirely real. The sickness didn't make him a stranger. It made him a person I hadn't fully seen, which is a harder thing. Frank comes up from Grant's Pass more now. He was there the day I cleaned out that bathroom cabinet for good, replaced the organizer, and had him walk me through exactly what was in it and why. The first time since Carol died I'd really understood my own medicine cabinet. My doctor adjusted my prescription after reviewing the blood work from those 14 months. She said the damage was reversible. She said the word caught the way you say a word when you know the alternative but choose not to say it out loud. Some nights I sit on the back porch and think about how close it was. Not just physically, close in the way of living next to something for a year and a half and calling it by the wrong name. I called it love, because that's what I wanted to see, and it was there. It was just threaded through with something else I couldn't see, the way a rope frays from the inside while it still holds. There's a Sunday ritual again now, different. I make coffee, take my medication, the right medication, from the pharmacy bottle, and sit at the table looking at the hydrangeas before the day starts. Sometimes the phone rings. Sometimes it's Frank. Sometimes Patrice, who stops by more since she heard what happened. Once or twice, it's my son's number. I answer those slowly now, the way you approach something you're still learning not to flinch from. His voice is quieter, more deliberate, like someone working hard to choose his words. He asks how I'm doing. I tell him the truth. Sometimes I ask him back, and he tells me the truth too, that some days are better than others, and that he's trying. I believe him. The way you believe something you can't afford not to. and also because the evidence is there, if you're willing to look at it without flinching. I've thought a lot about that lie, the first Sunday morning I told him I was alone when I wasn't. I think some part of me already knew. Not the shape of it, not the details, just enough small wrongness stacked up over enough Sundays to have a feeling that hadn't found words yet. The fatigue that never lifted, the dizziness on a Tuesday morning, the particular relief in his voice when I said I was alone. Not warmth, but the relief of a thing confirmed. I think some quiet part of me heard all of that and, just once, decided to send the truth in the opposite direction. I wasn't clever. I was a 63-year-old man standing in his kitchen, lying to his son for reasons he couldn't explain, and the lie stumbled into saving a life more through grace than any plan. I'm telling you this because I think a lot of people are living beside something they can feel but haven't named, something wearing the clothes of care, folded into routine, into the small daily things that are supposed to be simple. Love and harm can wear each other's clothing for a long time, and sometimes the truest thing you can do is notice the moment something in you decides, for no reason you can explain, to tell a different story, and then follow it. I followed it. The hydrangeas are doing well this spring. Carol would have liked that. I keep the heat at whatever temperature I decide now, and on Sunday mornings I pour my coffee, take my medication, and sit with the quiet before the day starts. Some mornings the quiet is enough.